Have you ever spent a night in a building that feels alive, but not in a good way? Tonight, I'm taking you inside Old Town's most haunted building, patrolling the empty hallways during the witching hour. What I found, you won't believe. The Grand Palms Hotel, an elegant Victorian building nestled in the heart of Old Town, San Diego, had always been a sanctuary for those who sought a glimpse into the past. Built in the late 1800s, it was a fusion of history and modern luxury, with Victorian furnishings, ornate chandeliers, and wallpaper that had faded with time. To the tourists, it was a charming relic of the past. To its staff, it was just another place to clock in and out. I had only been working there as a night security guard for 3 months. Before that, I worked as a mechanic fixing electrical circuits in a small shop, but with the economy in freefall, I had to find something else. My cousin, who worked at the hotel as a bellman, got me the job after hearing they were short-handed on night shifts. The first time I stepped into the Grand Palms, I was taken aback by how beautiful and eerie it was. The air always felt thick, heavy with the weight of history. The old oak floors creaked with every step I took, and the smell of lavender and wood polish lingered like a memory that refused to fade. I remember Mrs. Garcia, the night supervisor, handed me a folded piece of paper on my first night. It was old, worn, and faded, like something you would find in an antique store. I thought it was just the usual security protocols, but the look on her face said otherwise. She spoke in a low, steady tone, her eyes never leaving mine. Follow these rules exactly, no exceptions. If you value your job and your safety, don't question them. The first rule was straightforward: never enter the maintenance room after midnight. The second rule read, if you hear knocking from any room past 2 a.m., don't answer, pretend you didn't hear it. The third was the most peculiar: if you see a man in a black suit standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., don't make eye contact, just walk past. I chuckled nervously. I had no idea what to make of them, but I figured she was just being overcautious. Hotels like this often had their quirks, right? That first night I began my rounds at 11:45 p.m., just as Mrs. Garcia had instructed. The building was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the old radiators and the distant clang of a doorbell ringing on the far side of the hotel. I checked each floor, walking slowly to get a feel for the place, but when I reached the second floor, I heard something. It was faint at first, like a soft rustling, followed by a low whispering sound. I stopped dead in my tracks. The hallway was empty. There was no one in sight. I took a few steps forward, but the whispering grew louder, as though someone was calling my name. Suddenly, the door to room 215, which was supposed to be vacant, creaked open just a crack. I froze. A cold wind rushed past me, and the door slammed shut. I didn't know what to do. The rules flooded my mind. Don't answer knocking. Don't investigate. I walked quickly past the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt suffocating, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. When I returned to the security office to check the cameras, the log had a message waiting for me. Check room 310 immediately. The message was from Mrs. Garcia. At this point, I thought it might be some kind of test. Perhaps they were seeing if I could handle the weirdness of working the night shift. But when I entered the hallway near room 310, I felt something off. The door was cracked open, and there was a strange, almost electric hum coming from inside. I stepped closer and reached for the doorknob, feeling the cold metal under my fingers. It rattled in my hand as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. I jerked my hand back, stepping away from the door. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. It wasn't until the next night that I learned the full significance of the rules. Mrs. Garcia pulled me aside and handed me a second piece of paper, this one thicker, yellowed, and even more worn. The handwritten list contained 7 rules. The first was simple: never go near room 310 after midnight. The second read, if you hear piano music from the grand ballroom, ignore it, don't go inside. The third was almost comical: if someone asks you for directions to the old cemetery, tell them it's been relocated. No one should be there at night. I had no idea what these rules meant, but the strange occurrences started to add up. One night after I finished my rounds, I found the old guest registry tucked into the drawer. I couldn't resist the urge to flip through it. That's when I saw her name, Margaret Harris, checked in on August 17. 1892, her room 310. Suddenly, the whispers, the strange occurrences, and the rules all made sense. The hotel wasn't just old, it was haunted with spirits tied to the building's history. Margaret Harris had been a guest at the hotel when it first opened. According to the records, she had died mysteriously in room 310 under unknown circumstances. But it wasn't just her. The more I dug, the more I learned about the hotel's troubled past. There were multiple entries in the registry of people who had mysteriously disappeared or died under strange circumstances. They were all tied to rooms in the hotel, and they all seemed to have one thing in common: they ignored the rules. As I dug deeper into the building's history, I learned that the hotel had burned down in 1912, killing a dozen guests. The fire started in room 310, the same room that Margaret Harris had died in, and the hotel had been rebuilt using materials from other old buildings around San Diego. Each part of the building had its own dark history, and it seemed like the ghosts of those who had died here had never left. I had been warned. Mrs. Garcia had told me the rules for a reason. And as each night passed, the boundaries between the living and the dead began to blur. The second night after I'd found the registry, the air in the hotel felt heavier, as if it had absorbed the weight of the many secrets it housed over the decades. The creaking floorboards underfoot seemed more pronounced, as if the building itself were waking from a long slumber. The chandelier in the lobby glimmered with a cold, eerie light that flickered like it was uncertain whether it wanted to illuminate the space or sink it into darkness. I walked past the grand staircase that led to the upper floors, taking my usual route. The walls, adorned with Victorian portraits of long-dead guests, seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. I could feel the weight of the hotel's history pressing in on me, and the strange rules that had been imposed on me rattled in my mind like a cage. Rule #1, never enter room 310 after midnight. Rule #2, if you hear piano music from the grand ballroom, ignore it and keep walking. Rule #3, if you see a man in a black suit standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., don't look at him, just walk past. I had no intention of breaking these rules, not after what I'd already experienced. The first night I had tried to brush off the strange noises and unsettling presence in the hotel, but now it was impossible to ignore. It felt as though I were walking through a ghost story and I was the protagonist, unwittingly stumbling toward a dark and twisted fate. That night, after I had made my rounds and was sitting in the security office, something happened, something I hadn't anticipated. It was just past 2 a.m., and I was reviewing the camera feeds when I noticed something strange. The elevator, which had been still for hours, suddenly chimed. I froze. The hotel only had 3 floors. Why was the elevator moving? I checked the camera feeds again. The doors were open on the second floor. No one was inside. The button lights flickered as though they were struggling to remain lit, and for a brief second I thought I saw a figure standing near the doors. I shook my head, trying to clear my vision. Just tired, I muttered to myself, it's just a malfunction. But deep down, I knew better. The elevator didn't malfunction that way. Not here. I grabbed my walkie-talkie, pressing the button, my voice low and careful. Mrs. Garcia, you there? Nothing. The radio crackled, but no response. I tried again. Miguel, you copy? Still no answer. I stood up from the desk, my legs feeling like lead. Every instinct told me to stay put, but something in the pit of my stomach urged me to investigate. I made my way to the second floor where the elevator had stopped. As I approached the doors, the temperature in the hallway dropped significantly. I could see my breath condensed in the chill air. The elevator door creaked open, revealing an empty car. The soft hum of its motor was the only sound. I stepped inside cautiously. The lights inside the elevator flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. It felt wrong. It felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I hit the button for the lobby, but instead of descending, the elevator lurched upward. The indicator above the doors glowed with an eerie red light, showing a floor number that shouldn't exist, floor 4. I stared at it, heart pounding. There was no 4th floor, not in this building. It was a mistake, a glitch in the system, except it wasn't. The elevator kept climbing, the brass doors scraping as they moved upward, and for the first time I felt truly alone. I pressed the lobby button again. This time it worked. The elevator dropped and I was thrown back to the first floor. The doors opened, revealing the familiar marble lobby. Everything was quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. I stepped out, my mind racing. The elevator had malfunctioned, I told myself, but something deeper told me this wasn't just a technical issue. I walked toward the security office, trying to push the feeling of unease aside. When I sat down in the office, I glanced at the clock. 2:30 a.m. It was late, but the quiet felt unnatural. Even though the hotel was empty, there was a heaviness in the air, a feeling like the walls were watching, waiting. I returned to my rounds shortly after. As I walked down the long hallways, past the closed doors of rooms, I felt something change. The familiar sounds of the hotel, the creaking of the floors, the rustling of the old curtains, seemed muted. But then just as I passed room 310, I heard it, the soft shuffle of cards, the click of poker chips. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I had to keep walking, but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to see if it was real. I had to know who or what was inside. I reached for the doorknob. It was as cold as it had been before, icy against my hand. I twisted it slowly. The door opened. Inside, the room was empty, but the sound of a poker game filled the air. Cards shuffled across a table, poker chips clinked together as if they were in use, but there was no one there. No players, no game. The light overhead flickered. I stepped back, my hand shaking, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made me jump. I stumbled away from the door, my pulse racing. What the hell was going on? I turned and walked away quickly, forcing myself to ignore the growing sense of dread gnawing at my insides. Back in the security office, I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. The camera feeds showed nothing unusual. The hotel was still as quiet as it had been when I arrived, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something wasn't right in this place. I checked the clock again, 3:15 a.m. I still had a long night ahead of me. The strange events didn't end there. At 3:30 a.m., as I was walking past the grand ballroom, I heard it, the sound of a piano playing softly from inside. It was haunting, like a ghost of the past playing a forgotten tune. Rule #2, if you hear piano music from the grand ballroom, ignore it. I did exactly that. I walked past, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't afford to break the rules, not after everything that had already happened. But just as I passed the ballroom doors, I felt something. A cold breeze, a whisper barely audible. Don't go. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't just a voice. I stopped in my tracks and turned toward the ballroom doors. The sound of the piano grew louder, as though someone or something was inviting me inside. I took a deep breath and kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the hallway. As I passed room 310 again, the door was slightly ajar. This time I didn't even stop. I didn't dare. The night dragged on and the unease in the air only grew. By 5 a.m. When my shift was finally coming to an end, I felt like I hadn't just been working in the hotel. I felt like I had been living in its shadows. I was exhausted, my mind spinning with the strange events. As I handed my keys back to Mrs. Garcia, I wanted to ask her more. I wanted to know what the hell was happening, but something stopped me. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady. I nodded, though I couldn't hide the exhaustion in my eyes. "Just another night," I said, though I knew it wasn't true. As I left the hotel, the front doors swung open with a loud creak, and I stepped into the early morning light. The air was crisp, and the city streets were quiet, but inside the Grand Palms, the night was far from over. The third night felt different. The air was thick with a strange electricity, a hum that seemed to come from nowhere. I arrived at the Horton Grand Hotel for my shift, but this time something was off from the moment I walked through the back employee entrance. It wasn't just the usual weariness that clung to my bones after a long day. It felt like something deeper, something that was starting to seep into the walls of the hotel. It was 10:30 p.m. when I arrived. Street outside quiet as usual. The gas lamp quarter had its own rhythm, but the nights were always eerily silent. Inside, the familiar scent of dust and old wood greeted me, and the quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the corner of the lobby was almost like a heartbeat, steady, predictable. Mrs. Garcia was already at the front desk, typing away at the computer. She glanced up when I walked in, offering a tired smile. "Night shift, huh?" she said, voice low. Almost as if she were speaking to herself more than to me. I nodded, tossing my bag into the small employee locker. "Yeah, looks like another long night ahead." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze flicking toward the back hallway. "Just be careful tonight, Diego. Some things don't sleep here." I chuckled nervously. "It's just an old building, right?" "Yeah." She paused, looking me up and down. "But old buildings have memories, and sometimes they remember things better than people. I didn't know what she meant by that, but I didn't press her for more. I had a shift to start. As I made my way to the security office, the feeling of being watched crept over me again. It was subtle at first, just a tug on the back of my mind, but it grew stronger as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. My boots scraped on the old wooden steps as I walked, the sound sharp in the dead silence of the night. I walked my usual route, passing room 310 without a second thought. The door was still slightly ajar, as if it was waiting for someone to push it open. But tonight I didn't stop. Rule #1, never enter room 310 after midnight. I had seen things in that room, things I couldn't explain. I wasn't about to get close again, not after the last time. As I made my way down the hallway, something caught my attention, a faint sound. Like footsteps behind me, I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, as it had been just moments before. I paused, taking a deep breath, chalking it up to nerves. The hotel was old, and the sounds it made in the night were strange, unpredictable. But still, there was that nagging sensation that something wasn't right. I kept walking, trying to push the feeling down. The third floor was silent, save for the soft hum of the old radiator system. I checked the fire exits, locked the back doors, and passed the empty guest rooms. Everything seemed normal, too normal. I hadn't heard the piano music yet. And the quiet only added to the tension that I couldn't shake. At 12:30 a.m., I found myself in front of the elevator. As always, the lobby was dark, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit lights. I pressed the button, waiting for the elevator to arrive. It took a moment, the doors opening with a soft chime. Inside, the brass fixtures glowed faintly under the flickering lights. The elevator was empty. I pressed the button for the third floor. Feeling the old wood beneath my fingertips, the doors closed with a soft thud. Then the elevator did something strange. It didn't go up. Instead, the floor indicator flickered again, this time showing floor 4. The elevator shook lightly as it began to move. My heart skipped a beat. "Not this again," I muttered, pressing the button for the lobby. The elevator hesitated, as if confused, and then lurched downward. When the doors opened, I was back in the lobby. The elevator was malfunctioning again, but as I stepped out, something caught my eye. The hallway beyond was not as I remembered it. The farthest part of the hall, the one near the emergency exit, was different. The walls seemed to stretch further, the doors more numerous than they should have been. I knew every corner of this hotel, every crack in the floor, every door, but these were new. I turned back, heading toward the security office. The whole hotel felt alive in a way it never had before, as though it had opened up to reveal something hidden. But I forced myself to focus. I had a job to do. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I made my way to the ballroom for my routine check. As I approached the doors, I could hear it, the soft, haunting melody of piano music floating through the cracks in the ornate doors. It was more persistent now, echoing through the halls in a way that made my skin crawl. Rule #2, if you hear piano music from the grand ballroom, ignore it. I did my best to follow the rule. I kept walking, reminding myself that I had done this 100 times before. But as I passed the ballroom doors, something made me stop. The music wasn't just in the background now, it was clearer, closer, and unmistakably real. There was someone playing the piano inside, but who? I hesitated. I should turn around, I should leave, but something pulled me toward those doors. I reached for the brass handle, but then I heard a voice, a low, haunting whisper. "Don't go in." It was so clear. It almost sounded like someone had spoken directly into my ear. The hairs on my neck stood up. I turned on my heel, retreating quickly down the hallway, the sound of the piano growing louder and more insistent behind me. I glanced back at the ballroom doors, now closed. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. At 2 a.m., my walkie-talkie crackled to life. It was Mrs. Garcia's voice, distorted but clear. "Diego, are you there? We have a situation in room 310. I froze. Room 310. "Oh, what's going on?" I answered, my voice tight. "There's someone in there and they're asking for you." My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" There was a pause before Mrs. Garcia responded, her voice eerily calm. "I don't know, just get up there, Diego, don't ask questions." I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the stairs, but as I reached the second floor, I felt it, the unmistakable chill of something close behind me. I turned, but the hallway was empty. The faint sounds of the piano echoed through the walls, and somewhere beyond room 310, I swore I heard whispers. The door to room 310 was wide open. I stepped closer, my feet hesitant but drawn by some unseen force. As I reached for the door, a flash of light, a pale, flickering glow flickered from inside. I froze. The room was empty. But the lights were on, and the same old poker table was set up in the corner, cards scattered across the surface. In the corner of the room, the figure of a man sat, staring at the empty cards as if waiting for someone to arrive, but there was no one else in the room. He stood up, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "Tommy," I whispered, but the figure didn't respond. He just stared at me, his cold eyes unblinking. The air in the room felt thick, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Tommy's eyes never left me as he slowly reached for something on the table. "Don't play the game, Diego," he said in a low, gravelly voice, his words like a curse hanging in the air. "The house always wins." The door slammed shut behind me. The hours after the strange encounter in room 310 felt like a dream, one that shifted between waking and sleeping with each step I took. The air around me felt thick, heavy with something otherworldly, as if the building itself was breathing, alive in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. I still couldn't shake the feeling of Tommy's eyes on me, the unblinking stare that seemed to burn into my soul. His warning echoed in my head, "The house always wins." But what did that mean? I had followed the rules, every single one of them. I hadn't broken a single guideline that Mrs. Garcia had so meticulously outlined. I was doing my job, doing what I was supposed to do. Yet each night seemed to bring something worse, something darker. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I stood in front of the elevator once more. The door to the shaft opened with an unsettling creak, and the polished brass of the buttons seemed to glint eerily in the dim light of the hallway. I pressed the button for the second floor, but this time the elevator didn't respond immediately. Instead, I heard the sound of something scraping against the metal, as if the elevator was grinding its gears. A faint, hollow noise, something trapped inside, rattled through the building's old structure. I hesitated, pressing the button again. The lights above the door flickered, and the elevator doors slid open. But what I saw inside stopped me cold. The floor indicator was stuck on floor 4, the very same floor I had never seen in the hotel before. My heart raced as I stepped back, trying to ignore the chilling thought that had been growing in the back of my mind for the past few hours. This hotel was more than just a building, it was something else entirely. I swallowed hard, gathering my courage. The walkie-talkie crackled to life in my hand, breaking the silence of the moment. "Diego," Mrs. Garcia's voice crackled over the radio, sounding unusually frantic. "Get to the 4th floor now." The urgency in her voice was enough to push me into action. I pressed the button for the 4th floor, the doors closing behind me. As the elevator ascended, I noticed that the temperature inside the cabin had dropped significantly. My breath misted in front of me. It was as though I were no longer in the Horton Grand Hotel, but in another time, one that existed in parallel with the present. The doors opened slowly, revealing a corridor that stretched far beyond what I had ever seen before. It was as though the building had shifted, creating new spaces that shouldn't have existed. The walls, which had once been covered in old wallpaper, were now bare, revealing the cracked brick beneath. There was no light, save for the eerie glow from the elevator, which illuminated the hallway in a sickly yellow hue. As I stepped out of the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned down the long corridor, my footsteps the only sound, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I glanced down at my watch. 3:15 a.m., Rule #4, if a room service call comes after midnight, ignore it. No one is staying in those rooms. The rules ran through my mind as I walked. Nothing here is as it seems. I reached the first door on the left, which appeared to be an old storage closet. A rusty doorknob creaked as I twisted it. Inside, a stack of discarded furniture lay on the floor, old wooden chairs and tables. Some of them overturned, but what caught my attention was the faint light seeping from underneath the farthest door. A low hum echoed from behind it. There was no doubt in my mind now, someone or something was in that room, but I wasn't supposed to open it. I wasn't supposed to enter. The hum grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like voices, whispers, perhaps too low for me to distinguish, but nonetheless unmistakable. I stepped closer to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. The whispers were becoming clearer, but now I could hear something else. A woman's voice, soft and pleading. "Please," she whispered, "help me." I hesitated, the rules pulling at me, urging me to step away, but I couldn't resist. My hand reached for the doorknob and I slowly turned it, the door creaking open with a slow, agonizing sound. Inside, the room was far larger than I expected. It was an old ballroom. Its once grand chandeliers hanging low, covered in dust. The air smelled stale, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. The floorboards were cracked, their edges warped with time, and in the middle of the room a woman in a long, tattered white dress stood, her back to me. She didn't move. I could hear her whispering, "Please help me." But when I stepped further into the room, her voice stopped. She turned slowly, her face obscured by the shadows of the chandelier. It wasn't her face that stopped me in my tracks, it was her eyes. Hollow, dark pits where eyes should have been. The woman in white smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was a smile of desperation, of hopelessness. "You should have never come here," she said in a voice that was not her own. I stepped back, heart hammering in my chest. Before I could move, the ground beneath me seemed to lurch. I reached out to steady myself, but I found myself sinking, the floor beneath my feet giving way. My legs buckled, and I fell hard to the ground, only barely catching myself against one of the old chairs. The woman in white was gone. The room was silent. I tried to catch my breath, my mind racing. I should have left. I should have followed the rules. I needed to leave now. But as I pushed myself up from the floor, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound coming from the other side of the room. The same whispers again. But this time they weren't distant. They were close, right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I was alone, or was I, from behind me? I heard a door creak open. It was as if the room itself was alive, shifting around me. A flash of light caught my eye, and I turned just in time to see a figure standing in the doorway. The man looked out of place, dressed in a sharp, old-fashioned suit. He was tall, his eyes shadowed, but his presence was overwhelming. The way he stood there looking down at me with an eerie calmness was unnerving. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. "I'm just another visitor," he said softly, his smile too wide, his eyes too empty. "The house is full of visitors, Diego." He took a step closer, and I backed up instinctively. His presence felt cold, too cold, like a storm front moving in. Before I could react, the figure turned and stepped back through the door, vanishing into the dark shadows beyond. The events from that night were still fresh in my mind when I stepped into the hotel the next evening. I had barely gotten any sleep, my thoughts constantly spiraling back to the strange woman in white and the tall man who'd appeared at the door. Who were they? What did they want? The eeriness of the fourth floor lingered, settling in the pit of my stomach like an unresolved question. I couldn't stop thinking about that fourth floor, the one that didn't exist. How had I never seen it before? Where had it come from? My shift began at midnight, and as soon as I entered the employee entrance, I could feel the atmosphere of the hotel shift. The air was dense, almost like the building was waiting for something to happen. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows down the hall. Everything felt off. The usual hum of the hotel's late-night routine was missing. There were no guests checking in, no loud voices. No bustling activity, it was just silent. I walked past the security office, glancing over at the clock on the wall. 12:05 a.m., the second shift had started. "Diego, Mrs. Garcia's voice crackled from the walkie-talkie on my belt. I hadn't expected her to be back so soon. "I need you to go to the fourth floor." I froze. The fourth floor. I knew I'd heard her wrong. "The fourth floor, Mrs. Garcia." "I don't argue." She interrupted, her voice sharp. "There's something wrong with the elevator. Go check the system." The fourth floor. I had tried to avoid it ever since my first encounter with it. I knew something was off about that floor, something I couldn't explain, but I had no choice. I couldn't question Mrs. Garcia, especially not after everything that had already happened. "Understood," I muttered, gripping the walkie-talkie tighter. I walked toward the elevator. The silence in the hotel seemed to stretch endlessly as I stepped into the elevator. I pressed the button for the fourth floor. Nothing. The door didn't close. I tried again, pressing the button harder this time. Still nothing. The elevator remained stagnant. The walkie-talkie crackled again, a sharp hiss of static. "Diego, are you there? We've lost contact with the fourth floor. Check the system and report back immediately." "I'm on it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But there was no denying the unease crawling through my skin. The elevator doors finally closed with a hesitant ding, and the soft hum of machinery started as the elevator ascended. As it moved up, I heard something, a faint whisper that echoed, almost like a wind, a draft that shouldn't be there. "It's coming from the fourth floor." My stomach twisted with unease. The feeling of impending doom, the same feeling I'd experienced when I'd first seen the forgotten floor, returned with full force. The elevator stopped, and I held my breath. The doors opened, the hallway was dark, empty, and it stretched on longer than I remembered. I stepped out cautiously, my eyes scanning the dim hallway. The air was different here, cooler, almost too cool for this time of year. I could see my breath mist in the air. The walls that lined the corridor were made of aged wood, their edges curling as if they had been there for decades, maybe longer. The hotel was holding something back, something it didn't want me to see. The shadows in the hallway seemed to shift, almost alive, like they were watching me. At the end of the corridor, I could see an old door slightly ajar. It wasn't a room I had seen before. A slight creaking sound reached my ears as I walked toward it, and I noticed the faint light slipping through the crack. It was an odd thing for the door to be ajar. No one had stayed in this part of the hotel for years, from what I knew. The hotel was too old, too decrepit for guests to request a room here, yet there was a room at the end of the hallway, one I'd never noticed. With a mixture of hesitation and compulsion, I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The room was vast, larger than anything I had expected. It was decorated in an old Victorian style, but what stood out to me wasn't the furniture or the old tapestries. No, what grabbed my attention was the window at the far end of the room. It wasn't the view outside that caught me off guard. There was something off about the reflection in the glass. For a moment I thought I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection, but when I spun around, the room was empty. My heart pounded in my chest. It's just a trick of the light, I told myself, but the feeling of being watched lingered, clawing at the back of my mind. I looked back at the window. That's when I noticed the figure in the reflection. Standing behind me in the window was a man. He was wearing an old-fashioned suit, dark and heavy, and his eyes were black, deep black, almost like they were carved out. His lips parted into a slight smile, but it was a grin that didn't belong. It was sinister, mocking. The man wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at the room behind me. I spun around in a panic, but no one was there. The room was empty, just like before. "You're seeing things," I told myself. I was about to leave the room when a loud bang echoed from down the hallway. My heart jumped in my chest, and I froze, the sound of a door slamming ringing in my ears. I stepped quickly back into the hallway and saw it, room 410. The door was open, just like the one I had passed earlier, but now the shadows in the hallway seemed to move with purpose, as though they had a life of their own. I knew I shouldn't go in, but I was already moving, stepping toward the door as if something was pulling me closer. The hallway stretched on before me as if it were never ending. When I reached the door, I pushed it open. Inside, there was a dim light, flickering weakly from a candle sitting on a table. The walls were lined with shelves full of old records, photographs, books, and papers, all untouched by time. But what I saw at the center of the room sent a jolt through my spine. A man sat at a desk. His head was lowered, his hands resting on the old wooden surface, and in front of him he was writing furiously, as if time was running out. I took a step forward, but something in the room felt wrong. It felt like stepping into another world entirely. The man's handwriting was strange, crooked, and twisted. It was as if the paper itself resisted being written upon. Who are you?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow in the stillness. The man didn't respond, he just kept writing. I stepped closer. "Sir," I repeated, still nothing. As I reached for his shoulder, the man's head jerked up, his face twisted in a grotesque grimace. His eyes were wide, hollow sockets with no trace of life. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low and hollow. "They'll come for you next." I staggered back, a wave of dread rushing through me. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Before I could react, the man's figure dissolved into thin air, leaving only the dim candlelight flickering against the empty desk. I was alone, but the whispers, they were back. They filled the air, swirling around me like a storm, voices faint and urgent. The building seemed to groan under its own weight, as if it was about to collapse in on itself. The echoes were real, but they were fading. I had heard enough. The haunting presence of the room, the figure at the desk, was too much to ignore. I turned on my heel, heart racing as I dashed back to the elevator. This hotel, this building, it wasn't just old. It was something alive. It was feeding, growing. And I was a part of its twisted history. I stepped back into the elevator, my heart hammering in my chest. The faint whispering sounds that filled the air still buzzed in my ears. I pressed the button for the ground floor, watching the doors close with a soft ding behind me, but as the elevator descended, I felt the pull of something unseen. There was a pressure in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The elevator stopped on the second floor, not the ground floor, I thought. My mind racing, I pressed the button for the lobby again, but the doors didn't open. The elevator shook slightly before the light above the button flickered, and I heard a low hum, almost like a distant voice. The weight in the air increased, and it felt like the building had suddenly become a part of me, like it was watching me, listening to my every move. The elevator began to rise again. I tried to ignore the odd sensation that crept up my spine as the elevator slowly moved upward, my gaze fixed on the floor indicator. It wasn't the normal flicker of an old elevator. This time the numbers changed erratically. 2, 3, 4, and then 5. My stomach dropped. There was no 5th floor in the Horton Grand Hotel. I reached for the emergency stop button, but before I could, the elevator jolted to a sudden halt. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything was plunged into complete darkness. A familiar sound broke the silence, the soft click of the elevator doors opening. I didn't even have time to think. Before I could reach for the walkie-talkie at my belt, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and measured. It wasn't just the creak of the building settling. These were real footsteps echoing against the walls of an empty space. A low growl of static from my walkie-talkie pierced through the silence, followed by a voice I recognized instantly. "Diego, you there?" I froze. It was Miguel's voice, but his tone was different, distorted as if he were far away. "I'm here," I replied, swallowing hard. "What's happening?" A long pause. "Something's wrong." Miguel's voice crackled again, much weaker now. "They've been here, they're still here, waiting." Then the walkie-talkie cut off. I raised it to my ear again, but the static was all I heard. "Something's wrong," I thought, trying to steady my breathing. I had no idea where I was, what floor I was even on, but I knew something had changed. The building was more alive than ever. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped out cautiously, my heart hammering louder with each step as I moved down the hallway. The air felt thicker here, colder. The light above flickered erratically, casting dark shadows against the walls. There were more rooms than I remembered, rooms that hadn't been there before. 501, 502, 503. None of these existed. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, leading into the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave this place behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was pulling me deeper, urging me to go further. I continued walking. The soft sound of footsteps echoed ahead. No one was supposed to be here. The hotel was empty, but the sound persisted, growing louder with each step I took. I turned the corner and stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure, a woman in white. Her silhouette stood motionless, framed by the dim light. She was staring straight ahead, her features obscured by the shadows. I could feel her presence before I saw her, an icy chill that crawled down my spine. I didn't move, she didn't move either. Then her voice broke the silence. "Where am I?" she asked softly, her voice trembling as if she didn't recognize the place she stood in. "Why can't I leave?" It was the same voice. The same tone I'd heard in the lobby when I'd first encountered her. The woman in white, the one who had asked for directions to the train station. But this time her face was different. Her eyes were empty, hollow, as though the light had gone out of them. I couldn't answer. My mind raced, but all I could do was stare. "You don't belong here," I finally muttered, unsure if the words were meant for her or myself. Her head tilted slightly, and she took a step closer, her soft footsteps echoing like the distant cry of a forgotten memory. "What do you mean?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting so long." The words hit me like a cold slap. "Waiting for what?" "For my train," she replied, her voice fading. It's been so long." Her words barely registered in my mind as I stepped back, my fingers brushing the edge of the nearest door frame. The woman continued to stand there, her face barely visible in the shadows. "She's lost," I thought, shaking my head. "She's stuck here." I wanted to leave, but something kept me there, a pull that was stronger than my fear. The hotel was alive in ways I couldn't understand, but it wasn't just the ghosts that haunted it. It was something else, something darker. Before I could speak again, the sound of a door slamming open behind me broke the silence, followed by a loud voice. Diego, Mrs. Garcia's sharp tone cut through the air. What are you doing? Get back here immediately. I spun around in shock. The hallway stretched endlessly behind me, but Mrs. Garcia was nowhere to be seen. I looked back toward the woman in white, but she was gone, her presence having faded into the same empty shadows that had swallowed the hotel. Was she ever really there? I rushed back toward the elevator, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. The hotel seemed to stretch and bend as I moved, the hallways winding in ways that felt unnatural, like the walls were shifting just to torment me. The air was thick with the weight of countless years. The sounds of whispers, hundreds of them, filled the corridors. I couldn't shake the feeling that the building wasn't just haunted, it was alive, it was aware of me. It knew I was there and it was waiting for me to break. The elevator doors closed behind me with a faint ding and I pressed the button for the ground floor again. This time the elevator descended smoothly. The static from my walkie-talkie crackled again. Diego, don't let them take you. Miguel's voice rasped from the device. The elevator jolted to a halt and the lights flickered once more. The sound of heavy breathing echoed from the back of the elevator. I turned quickly only to find the cabin empty. It's not over. When the elevator doors opened to the ground floor, I stepped out into the dimly lit lobby. The stillness of the hotel surrounded me like a blanket, but the calm didn't last. In the far corner, I saw it, the desk. The guest register was open. The hotel knew. The silence of the hotel seemed to press down on me, thicker than ever. I stood frozen in the lobby, my breath coming in shallow gasps as if the very air had become heavier, more suffocating. The lobby's dim lights flickered above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and reach for me. The distant hum of the city outside felt miles away, a reality that no longer seemed to matter. The Horton Grand Hotel, once just another job, had turned into something else. The moment I stepped into the lobby, everything felt different. The very walls seemed to be watching me now, anticipating every move. There were no voices this time, no footsteps, no whispers. It was quiet, eerily so. But beneath that silence I could feel it, a hum just below the surface. It wasn't the hotel's usual creaks and groans. This was something more, something alive. I moved toward the front desk, instinctively reaching for the clipboard to check in for my shift. But as my fingers grazed the paper, I froze. The guest registry, the registry, was wide open in front of me. A single name was scrawled across the page, Alina Patterson. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just her name, it was the room number, room 418. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Room 418, the room that didn't exist. It was the same room that had been calling for room service night after night. The same room tied to the strange and disturbing calls I'd received. Room 418, the very room I had been warned about, the room that didn't belong. I glanced toward the elevator, instinctively knowing it wasn't going to be normal. The elevator was already there, the doors open. The brass buttons gleamed in the low light, casting an odd, eerie glow. I could hear a faint ringing in my ears, a soft, persistent ding coming from inside the elevator. I couldn't move. What was I supposed to do? The rules were clear, always follow them. They were the only thing keeping me safe in this strange place. And yet every instinct screamed at me to avoid the elevator, to turn away from the unsettling sense that it was waiting for me. Get in. The words appeared in my head like a whisper I couldn't ignore. The hotel was calling me again. It wanted me to get in, to do what it asked. And without fully understanding why, I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a soft swoosh. The light flickered, and the floor indicator slowly began to rise, but not to the third floor. No, it wasn't stopping at the normal floors. It began to climb higher and higher, past the fourth floor, past the fifth, until it stopped at a number I hadn't expected. Sixth floor. There was no sixth floor. The building had only 3. It didn't make sense. My mind raced as the elevator doors opened, and I felt the weight of the hotel's presence, its breath on the back of my neck, but I couldn't move. I stood there for what felt like hours. Unable to bring myself to step outside. There was no reason for me to be here. This wasn't part of the building I knew. There was no 6th floor, no rooms beyond the 3rd. The doors opened wider, and I finally forced myself to step out. The air was different here, cooler, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, mixed with something metallic, like a forgotten memory. As I took my first step into the hallway, I could see the faint outline of doors. A hallway stretching out in front of me, one I'd never seen before. The walls were lined with portraits, but they weren't the usual hotel decor. These were faded photographs, old ones. Some were blurry, others cracked and yellowed with age. They looked like they had been there for centuries. The first door I passed had a brass plaque on it, room 618. I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. There was no room 618. But there it was. I reached for the handle but hesitated. The air was thick with the sense that something or someone was watching me. The door handle felt unnaturally cold beneath my fingertips, like the temperature had dropped several degrees just by my touch. I could hear a faint whispering from behind the door, a low murmur of voices, but no sound of movement. Should I open it? My hand trembled as I slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, and I was greeted by the dark, room 618. The sight before me nearly made me gasp in shock. It was a hotel room, yes, but not one that belonged to the present. The room was in disarray, like a scene frozen in time. The bed was covered in dusty sheets and the furniture was draped in heavy white cloth. But the strangest part of all were the figures standing in the corners of the room, shadowy, barely tangible, yet unmistakably present. I stepped inside, cautiously, as if I were stepping into a dream, or worse, a nightmare. One of the figures stirred, its form slowly becoming more defined. The shape of a man sitting at the small table near the window. He was dressed in old worn clothes, but his eyes were unmistakable. They glinted in the dark, familiar and haunting. Elena. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. The air shifted and suddenly I could see her in the reflection of the window, the woman in white. She stood there staring at me through the glass, her face pale and empty. I turned to face her. "Do you know where my train is?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. It was the same question, the same tone. As if nothing had changed, as if she had been waiting all this time. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What was I supposed to say? The rules. I had to follow the rules. Tell her it's been demolished. But this time the words felt wrong. I wasn't just speaking to her. I was speaking to the hotel itself, the building that had held her, the place that had trapped her in this endless loop of longing. She doesn't want to leave. "Elena," I started. My voice barely above a whisper. "Your train. It's gone. The station was demolished years ago." Her expression didn't change. She just stood there, gazing at me with those empty eyes. Then she nodded slowly, her pale lips curling into a sad smile. "Thank you." And with that she was gone. Just as suddenly as she had appeared, the room grew still. The whispers faded. The shadows in the corners of the room melted back into the walls. I stood there, feeling a mixture of dread and confusion. What had just happened? I turned back to the hallway, only to find that the elevator had disappeared, leaving nothing but an empty shaft where it had once stood. I was stuck here, trapped, but not for long. I knew the rules. I had to follow them. It wasn't just for my safety, it was for everyone. I ran down the hallway toward the nearest staircase, but I could hear it, the sound of the piano again. The unmistakable strains of a waltz drifting up from the ballroom below. This time it wasn't just the music. It was the sound of a party, laughter, clinking glasses, people talking. It was all happening at once, but it wasn't real. The sun was beginning to rise as I stepped out of the elevator, my mind still reeling from the haunting vision I just experienced. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I had seen enough, too much in fact, to understand that the hotel was a prison for the lost, the dead, and the unfinished. My mind was a blur of memories, Elena's pale face, the music from the ballroom, the voices that never stopped. The hotel, it seemed, didn't just hold people, it collected them. I had no idea how long I had been inside. Hours, days. Time had become meaningless in the Horton Grand. The lines between the past, present, and future had blurred, and I felt as if I was drowning in the hotel's hungry, insatiable need for something more. I had followed the rules, kept my distance, but now I had broken them. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, but there was one last thing I needed to do. As I walked through the hotel's silent halls, I could feel the weight of the building pressing against me, the air thick with the knowledge that the hotel was alive, feeding, waiting. I had to find Mrs. Chen. She had been the one to guide me through all of this, to keep me in line, to ensure I didn't stray too far. She was the keeper of the hotel's secrets, and now I needed to know the truth. I found her in the security office, sipping her coffee with the same quiet determination she always had. Her calmness was both a comfort and a curse. It was as if she had already accepted what I was only beginning to understand, the hotel's power, its hunger, and the rules that kept it at bay. "You're late," Mrs. Chen said, not looking up from her papers. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice tight with the urgency of my thoughts. "I've seen things that don't make sense." She finally looked up, her sharp gaze piercing through me as if she could see everything I had experienced, everything I had been through. "I told you," she said softly. "The hotel has its own rules, its own needs. We are just visitors. We maintain the balance, and we stay out of the way." I shook my head. "But what happens when the rules don't work anymore? What happens when someone breaks them?" Her eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something else, fear. "Regret. You know the answer to that, Diego. It's not the first time it's happened. Tommy, Miguel, they didn't follow the rules. They thought they could fix things, help people, and the hotel took them." I felt a cold chill wash over me. "What do you mean, where are they?" Mrs. Chen's face hardened. "They're part of it now, just like the others. The hotel keeps them, here trapped in its history, forever." I swallowed hard. "Then what about me? What happens to me?" She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You have a choice, Diego. You can stay and the hotel will keep feeding on your fear, your desperation. You will become part of the hotel's story, or you can leave. But if you leave, you may never escape. The hotel will remember you. It always remembers." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I had been caught in its web. There was no escaping it now. The phones began to ring in the distance, breaking the silence between us. The sharp, incessant ringing echoed down the hall, growing louder, more urgent. "Do you hear that?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. She nodded slowly. "It started, the anniversary. The hotel is awakening." I understood what she meant. The building's power, its hunger, was intensifying. The boundaries between the living and the dead were thinning, and soon it would be impossible to tell where the past ended and the present began. I turned to leave, knowing what I had to do. I had to break the cycle. I had to stop the hotel from feeding. Mrs. Chen called after me. "The last rule, Diego, the one you haven't followed yet." I paused at the door. "What do you mean?" She stood and walked toward me, her steps slow, deliberate. "You followed all the rules, but there is one more. It's the most important one. You must never break the last rule." She stepped closer and whispered in my ear, her voice low and steady. "Do not let the hotel consume you. Do not become part of its story." I understood now. The hotel didn't just trap its guests and workers in endless loops of time. It fed on them, on their fear, their desperation, their unfulfilled desires. The more it consumed, the more powerful it became, and the more it wanted. I had been too close to losing myself, to becoming just another name in the margins of the hotel's story. But now I knew what I had to do. I had to stop it. Once and for all. I returned to the ballroom, the place where it all began. The piano music was still playing, but it was different now. The sound was no longer soothing or melancholic. It was discordant, jarring. The voices of the dead echoed in the walls, growing louder with each passing second. I had no illusions left. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a place of unfinished business, of incomplete stories that would never fade, but I had to end it. The rules, they weren't meant to protect us. They were meant to trap us. I reached the grand staircase, the one that led to the ballroom's door. It creaked under my weight, each step a reminder of the centuries of history that had shaped this place. As I pushed open the heavy doors, the ballroom appeared before me. It was just as I remembered, but more alive. The guests were still there, still dancing in their 1920s gowns, laughing, living a life that had long since ended. And in the corner, there was the piano, untouched, playing itself as if it had a will of its own. But I was done with the hotel's games. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop," I whispered, not just to the piano, but to the hotel itself. The music faltered, then stopped completely. The guests froze, their bodies suspended in time. The laughter died in the air, and for the first time I felt a stillness, a quiet so deep it could only be described as peace. I knew then that I had broken the cycle. The hotel's power was not in its ghosts, not in the rules, but in the fear it instilled in those who lived and worked there. As long as they followed the rules, the hotel had power. But when they chose to break them, to refuse to be part of the story, the hotel lost its grip. I walked back through the halls, no longer afraid. I had made my choice, and I was free.